thumb ring used in the release further increased the speed and penetrating power of arrows, which were made for different purposes. They were short and long-range arrows, singing arrows, which were used for singling, fire starting, stuff like that. That was very, very effective. So, yeah, one of the major reasons why they were so successful was Genghis Khan, and he had the ability to unite the people around one common goal and vision. Genghis's use of spies and psychological warfare, and the fact that his army backed it up, also turned their spies into a really messed with the heads of the enemies and kind of created a psychological warfare factor that was quite effective. Some of the strategies they had were horses. They also kind of had a mock retreat where they would fake retreat and then come back and then really catch them by surprise. The Smarta lands and language, they used the Smarta laws and language of sucked up kind of all the knowledge from other lands around the area. They also settled down and established an empire via the Pax Mongolica, which is pretty much peace in the Mongolian Empire, which allowed passage of free trade and really solid growth of the empire, which turned out to be incredibly effective for Genghis Khan, and that really turned out to be quite beneficial in the end for them, and that is kind of how the Mongolian Empire played out. But here's the important thing we did not discuss yet: the shift of power in the region, which is always very important to discuss. Before the Mongols came to power, it was the China, Tang, Song emperors and Persia. They had the power, but after the Mongols and Genghis Khan's devastation, they firmly had the power in the Asia, Europe, Middle Eastern world there. So that is very cool stuff. So now we turn to the Ottoman Empire, very big stuff. So they were one of the first main gunpowder empires. The importance of the new military technology has really prompted many scholars to label the 15th to 18th century the age of gunpowder empires. In the centuries prior to this period, Chinese armies under the Song Empire used fire arrows packed with gunpowder, but they saw little reason to expand the use of this new explosive. Early cannons were pretty inaccurate with noisy explosions. Could be used as very powerful intimidation tactics against the empires that they were, or the armies they were fighting against. So the Mongol armies overran China. Overran China found the gunpowder weapons effectively blasted openings in defensive walls and destroyed city gates, which was very helpful for access. The adaptation of gunpowder empires needed far more financial resources than they needed to supply troops using swords and spears. The demand for new weapons required enormous investments in armories, sophisticated financing, and highly specialized labor. The states that could finance these investments tended to dominate things, but the states that couldn't, not so good for them. The people who invented gunpowder were the Song Chinese dynasty, and the Europeans learned about this technology through invading them, from being invaded by the Mongols with gunpowder. So pretty much how it went is China invented it, Mongols conquered them, and Mongols invaded Europe. So Europe's like, we better get behind this gunpowder thing. It's a pretty big deal. Middle-class merchants and bankers dramatically increased their power and prestige, in part because their ability to finance the latest weapons really was needed by a lot of empires. So right now the power was shifting big time, and it was shifting from the Mongols to the Ottomans. The Ottomans were an Arab people by the steppes on the Arabian Sea, and their important leader, Osman Bey, was a warlord. And in fact, the name Ottoman in the Ottoman Empire was based from Osman's first name. The Ghazis were warriors of faith, and the Ghazis helped the Ottoman Empire expand to the west and not to the east or south, because prominent Muslim territories were in that direction. And one of the rules was that you did not fight other Muslims if you were a Muslim. So, yeah. They were known for their organization in the areas of taxation and record keeping, which was a pretty big deal. They took control of the Anatolian Plateau and the Byzantine Empire and established the seat of government in the city of Bursa. This was described as a pretty big event because they went from being nomadic to being settled, and were one of the last people to make that switch, but they did. One of the next main people was Mehmed the Conqueror. When Mehmed the Conqueror became Sultan, he strangled him to remove any competition of power, and one of the reasons why it was so difficult to capture Constantinople was because three of the sides were surrounded by water and incredibly thick walls. So he used gunpowder to crack these walls of Mehmed the Conqueror, and it was a big step in the milestone, a big milestone for that empire to crack Constantinople. And it was the fact that he used gunpowder was a big step in the right direction, and something that other empires use in the situation. Another big leader of the Ottoman Empire was Suleiman the Magnificent. When Suleiman became Sultan, he was very young and inexperienced, and in order to prove himself on the battlefield, he had to follow the tradition of his forebearers and expand the empire. He expanded it in two places called Belgrade and Rhodes. The Europeans feared Suleiman because of his use of dynamite. And this really hyped up his reputation because of the boom boom sticks. I guess you could say that really that put a fire under the bellies, quote unquote, of these people. Suleiman had lots of large monumental architecture projects built in the region. They demonstrated the wealth of the empire and the advancement of math and science. As the architects perfected the domed mosque, which was a pretty big deal. Such large, expensive projects were kind of symbols of the empire, and they were a pretty darn big deal. Which was pretty cool. So that was one of the main big things. And the shift in power in this situation was the Byzantines to the Ottomans. That was the big shift in this little sector of the world at that period of time. So right now to our next big empire. So, and that one that we will be focusing on is the Yuan dynasty and Marco Polo and his influence on that. Three places Marco Polo traveled in his big globe-trotting trip were Beijing, China, and Jerusalem. And one of the main areas where he traveled was Bangkok, Thailand, and he was a pretty big deal all throughout there, and it was really quite exciting. The things Marco Polo was able to discover and bring back to the European world about the crazy stuff that the empires of the East were doing. So what happened there was Kublai Khan, he was the leader of the China under Mongol rule. He became civilized and tolerant of other religion, and he was also one of the first Mongol empires that settled somewhere. He gathered information and mastered communication of his vast empire via little posts that were found along the main highways leading to cities where there were couriers on horses, spreading important information and communications. One of the main cities of Hangzhou in that empire had lakes, beautiful restaurants, and many palaces. And one of the things he wrote in his travels were the interesting culture that, just to put it lightly, that China had, and how different it was really from Europe. For example, Chinese begged foreigners to take matrons and actually lie with them, which is a little crazy. It may seem weird now. It's like, take my matron and lie with her. Very strange. Okay, so yeah, he had the Khan's personal credit card, which meant whoever hurt him would be attacked. So he was able to travel in comfort and safety in China. It was a big endorsement on the Khan's part in the Yuan dynasty that really shows that there were some major, there was no major trust issues. There was a lot of support. There was a lot of mutual respect between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo. The Polos returned home and faced a lot of challenges. Marco suggests they went by sea when they departed from the China coast, and there were hundreds of sailors when they set up. There were some notary documents that they described an attempt by the Venetian government to recover Polo's losses to the Persians, but it was not successful. He was kind of really conned out of a lot of his money by the Persians at the time. Polo is known for kind of changing the course of world history. This is a pretty big deal because Mongols' adventures improved relations between the West and the East. The West and the East gained more knowledge of what was going on in the West and vice versa. The West was like, wait a minute. When I say the West, I mean like Europe and Italy and England and other places like that. Like, what is going on in the East? This is some really crazy stuff. Now that we know about that. So, anyway, Yuan dynasty really, really rise in power in the Mongol Empire here. Eventually, that empire did fall out of power, but it had an incredibly strong run, and Kublai Khan was able to do quite a lot of good things for the people there. Now we turn to China's Ming Dynasty in Asia, obviously East and Southeast Asia. So the middle of the 14th century, the Yuan dynasty was run by the Mongols was in decline. Like all Chinese dynasties, was kind of coming to an end, and there was evidence the rulers had lost the mandate of heaven. The government was corrupt. It spent too much money on wars, and they could not collect enough taxes from the population to provide them with the services to keep them content. So, many Chinese leaders grew tired of being ruled by the foreign Mongols. They wanted to turn to a China run by Chinese, kind of like make China great again almost. In 1368, a rebel leader by the name of Zhu Yongzhang rebelled and formed the Ming Dynasty. So that is how that turned out. And after defeating the Mongol rulers of the Yuan Dynasty, Ming Emperor Hongwu started building new sections of the Great Wall. The Jinwei Imperial Secret Police served the emperors in the Ming Dynasty in China was formed. It was founded by the Hongwu Emperor in 1368 to serve as his personal bodyguards, but then it kind of grew into a sketchy secret police organization. There was also a legal code in the time of the Emperor Hongwu that was quite great. It was one of the great achievements of his era. Emperor Hongwu took great care of the whole project, and in instruction to the ministers told them the code of law should be quite easy to understand, so officials and inhabitants should not misinterpret those laws. The code of the Ming Dynasty treated slaves better than the Tang Dynasty. Under the Tang Code, slaves were treated almost like domestic animals, but they gained a lot more respect at that time period, which is very nice. China was a very isolationist place when it came to trade. To keep influence of outsiders to a minimum, only the government was allowed to conduct foreign trade, and only through 3 coastal ports, Canton, Macau, and Ningbo were the name of the ports. In reality, though, trade flourished up and down the coast. Profit-minded merchants kind of smuggled in some silk, porcelain, and other valuable goods into the eager hands of European merchants, and they paid for them with silver, much of it from mines in the Americas. So that's a sign of what's coming up in this episode. Christian missionaries accompanied European leaders into China. They brought Christianity and knowledge of European science and technology, such as the clock, which is interesting. China during the Ming Dynasty was home to many different religions as well, including Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, even Christianity, which was promoted by missionaries from Europe as well. So there was a lot of important stuff coming in there from the Ming Dynasty. A lot of new influences were spread and started. So now we turn to our next big point down the road of empires and explorers, our special episode. And what was forming now in Europe? Don't look now. National monarchies. Whoa, those were starting to form. So the thing was with them in Spain. We'll take a look at some of the characteristics. A nation-state is a country that has a strong central government, clear political boundaries, and is made up of people with a relatively common language and culture. So in the characteristics of the nation-state, in Spain, they had a strong central government with a marriage between Ferdinand and Isabella. There was a police state, and there was some spying on neighbors, and the implementation of the Inquisition was pretty dark, forcing political, cultural, and religious unity, and an Inquisition enforced the unity in Catholicism. That helps the third characteristic, which was an empire made up of people with a common language and culture. Also, clear political boundaries meant merging of Castile and Aragon, Reconquista, which was the conquering of the Granada, enforcing the implementation